If you've been following the channel with some time, you basically know that every now and again I do a kind of retrospective on different aspects of Destiny. One of the last two ones that I did was basically on Destiny catalysts, whether it was the ones that don't have catalysts or how some catalysts are very outdated. And that was one of my most well-respected and another one of those videos where it was a lot of people talking and that had genuinely good feedback. And so I kind of wanted to open another discussion, if you will, regarding one other thing, and that is pretty much just, will perk metas ever actually evolve past what they are? Now that I said that, I'm going to give you some time to think while I go on what is essentially the history, how Destiny 2 perks have gone. Now, going back to, well, actually thinking back to Destiny 1, while there was perks that were good, it didn't seem like there was a exactly consistent meta for a lot of things. You know, almost every rocket launcher could have tripod shooting 3 rockets and cluster bombs, or tracking cluster bombs. You know, there wasn't exactly a wide variety, aside from raid weapons, which, if I recall, the like the Wrath the Machine rocket launcher had a thing that allowed it to get a lot of shots, and of course King's Fall had Cocoon, which was basically auto-loading holster way back in the day. But regardless, while there was unique ones, it didn't seem like there was any perks that was a must-have. If it had certain perks, solid. But at the same time, while I said that, yes, there were metas. Shotguns that had rangefinder and things like that last round, for Crucible at least, really good. But PvE, I don't recall seeing much more differences in perks, because, you know, they were all solid and all retrospective, and there wasn't anything that was too broken over another. Then we get to Destiny 2, and of course the infamous launch of static rolls. If you don't know, back during year 1, a lot of these weapons right here that are still outdated as far as Rasputin's day, basically had static rolls. What that meant was they had, of course, the 3 barrel perks they had, the mag perks, barrels or sights, and they more than often only had 1 perk to choose from. Now, some of the weapons that were a little more endgame or later down the line did have 2 of them, which did add some playability, because I know High Impact Reserves was generally more PvE, and things like Zen Moment was more PvP. And for some guns, especially like the old, let's see, where did it go? The raid weapons from year 1, there's definitely good options, because you had 2 perks, which was nigh unheard of back in the day, with not only that, but also a 3rd perk option you go with. Now, from that time, pretty much raid weapons were the most, air quotes, PvE meta thing. And aside from that, they were pretty much everything else was rocket launchers in the time of day. It was a weird state thinking back to it, where everything had power, but at the same time, nothing was exactly powerful. Save for exotics. Exotics were essentially the turn of the tide. But I digress. Once Forsaken came out, it was a little more like regular Destiny, where we had 2 perks that came around, and more than enough, they seemed to follow the same kind of traits. Going back to some of my old weapons, once I actually make room for something so it's not also dark, when you look at some of the old weapons that I have from back in that time, this was the Gambit auto rifle that I held onto for a while. Rampage, simple enough, and triple tap. Extra ammo, solid enough. And then you had something like Parcel of Stardust. Rampage, again, opening shot, expected for pretty much everything that was a shotgun. And then Duke Mark 44, rapid hit, and Rampage. You see where I'm going here? But when Forsaken came out, sure, things were developing, and there was a few perks that did go forward, and there was, of course, new ones. But when you actually go down the line through the year of Forsaken, especially with Shadowkeep, a lot of the stuff that you see is oftentimes the repeat options. And if you notice anything, it's at least that it's a stat that's heavily required, in this case for Parcel, a range stat buff, or in the term of Hazard of the Cast, extra ammo, because while it is still stable on its own, extra rounds can go to the line. But like I said, I digress. It was either a stat that was heavily needed, or just straight up damage, especially with things like Blast Furnace being aggressive burst. It had a slower reload. Feeding Frenzy, there you go, problem solved. Same thing with threat level. It didn't exactly have the greatest damage, but Trench Barrel gave it a damage buff. Grave Robber gave it a reload. And you see what I'm saying here? The meta hasn't exactly evolved from here much down the line. Up until year 4-ish, maybe even, actually no, not even. Not until season 15 it was Season of the Lost, when the first stasis weapons came out, things started getting more subclass relevant. And that's where that's the important part, is things didn't exactly evolve for a while. Either it was more ammo, better reload, or damage, and then eventually we started getting more things that was basically a little bit more energy, but that wasn't exactly that, let's say, required until some time ago. Now, roles like this IS Luna that came around at the time, this was pretty much meh. Well, wait, that was the wrong one. Actually, I think it's the one on my character, but I digress. It was basically Headstone Unrelenting. Unrelenting, you rarely saw anyone pick it unless they were the person that was giving a guide for like a solo dungeon, and you needed something to keep you alive. And that was the last thing you could do to help you stay alive. But then Crucible, obviously different beast entirely. Most things that were kept for Crucible were all stat buffs. And of course, if you were around for that time, you know pretty much Quick Draw Snapshot was the go-to. Opening Shot, Snapshot, basically something that was either a range buff or a stat buff, or in the rare case, you actually had a damage buff like Kill Clip or something like that to keep a ball rolling, because back then, Kill Clip and Rampage could actually desperately help you snowball into a roll. But, you know, that's pretty much how it was. I think my Dire Promise, nope, that's not exactly an example. But let's see, as an example, where would I have put it? Well, let's just look at the Trials weapons. Right here, so this would have been a ideal roll. Opening Shot for more range, surplus for additional stats based on abilities. Granted, when it came to Trials, you know, you had, what's it called? You're usually out of abilities, but I digress. If it wasn't a stat buff or wasn't a damage buff that you knew you could proc, you were more or less leaving it behind. But on that note, then there was other things like Perpetual Motion that came out. That was pretty solid, especially since it could be procced on its own. You didn't need to do anything except move. And then Perpetual Motion became the meta because it was easier to proc than almost everything else. Eye of the Storm and other perks like that required you to go down on the list. Killing Wind required a kill, and that gave you extra range. Encore back in the day, it required either precision or body shot kills, but precision kills were what you needed, so if you got a body shot, you were kind of SOL. But that was pretty much it. And then the perk meta kind of shifted entirely once Witch Queen came out, because Subclass 3.0s launched more in depth. Because like I said, once Season 15 dropped with Season of Lost, we got our first hint of stasis weapons with things like Peace Bond, IS Luna coming out with Bungie 30th anniversary, and Fractifist. You started noticing things had like Headstone, and I forget when exactly it came out, but I think it might have been Witch Queen, but then Chill Clip started happening, where basically you could slow things and eventually encase them just naturally. But then we got things like destabilizing rounds, Repulsor Brace, Volt Shot, and then other things, basically everything that was subclass relevant. And then you started hearing, oh, everything you need for everything is everything that is subclass relevant. Like the Straxi Post, it's really good. Has Hatchling, it's really good for Strand, among other reasons. Then you had other things like New Pacific Epitaph, or other stasis grenade launchers. The one I had that was that big video I launched about Chill Clip not working with proxy nades. Yeah, that was autoloading and Chill Clip. It was really handy, really subclass relevant, and then other things like this. This was a rare horse. This was really specified, not exactly great. But you see what I mean here? Perks evolved from either being the consistent damage, stats, or, well, there's no great way to say it, damage, stats, or buff, to essentially being everything that you could either get ability energies out of, or ways to supercharge your abilities, like Swashbuckler. If I recall, that kind of had a back and forth, but I don't really exactly remember. Demolitionist, you got kills, you got your grenade, and you could eventually just throw grenades more often. And that's kind of, I'm not going to go more into exotics, just because that is more unique, and obviously those things are kind of set for their environments. But then you have other things that, like, to give an idea, Kept Confidence. All of its perks are essentially stat buffs. It's almost made for Crucible, because they're all stat related. No damages, but then you have other things like rocket launchers nowadays, and various machine guns, that they come out with all of the best damage perks, and all of the best variety, but at the same time, it's literally only good for damage. So if it had something like Unrelenting, Or, hell, actually, let me see if I can find an example. When did Braytech Osprey come out? Ah, here it was. Envious Assassin Bipod. Great for extra rounds. It's a unique perk, something you didn't actually see, but it's expanded magazine. And then you had ones like this. Almost all three of the perks that are available on this Braytech Osprey are neglectable and not at all useful. Because destabilizing rounds on a rocket launcher, while nifty idea, is kind of just not there. So that is essentially kind of what I wanted to go on, is talk about the evolution of mods. The fact that they went from, perks, they went from the simple static bonus benefit that were pretty powerful in their own right, but, you know, limited, to pairs of perks that almost always were a reload and a damage buff, to everything that was Crucible-wise being stat buff related, and then when Witch Queen came about and Subclass 3.0s came out, and Bungie wanting more ways to buff said ability trees, basically everything that was related to your subclass was everything that was needed, and almost everything else was take or leave. So I hedge the question, are we ever going to see a better perk meta? I know Destiny is likely at the end of its lifeline, you know, because we have Final Shape, it's real make or break. If Final Shape isn't that great, episodes might, or the first season of episodes might be not exactly there. Plus, with Bungie eventually going on the offensive for Marathon, it's likely that, you know, Destiny might be put on the back burner, we might not get a whole new perks, and big sandbox reworks or anything like that. Because come to think of it, some time ago, I remember when Encore was basically headshots give you range, body shots give you stability, and now it is basically kills give you range and stability, and a variety of other perks being reworked like Trench Barrel and the like. So here's hoping that perks can evolve maybe a little bit, because as much as it's nifty when you have a gun that is subclass relevant, it does get a little bit boring when every gun that needs to be effective needs to be subclass relevant. With that, my name is the Mad Scorpion. I will see you in the next video.